Uber in Oakland, XCodeGhost gets scarier, and Medium Steven Levy is here to talk Pebble Watches and VR. Tech News Tonight is next.
This is Twit.
This is Tech News Tonight, episode 430 for Wednesday, September 23rd, 2015. This episode of Tech News Tonight is brought to you by Braintree. If you're working on a mobile app and searching for a simple payment solution, check out Braintree. With one simple integration, you can offer your customers every way to pay. To learn more and for your first $50,000 in transactions fee-free, go to BraintreePayments.com/TechNight. Welcome, I am Megan Maroney. Let's get to the tech news. Today, Uber announced that it's moving to Oakland, California. The new headquarters east of San Francisco will house 2,000 to 3,000 employees in the former 350,000 square foot Sears building downtown. Once they've moved in, the company will be the largest employer in Oakland that's not a government agency or a hospital. According to the Oakland Tribune, Uber won't move in until 2017. And not all of their new neighbors are busy baking welcoming pies yet. Many people took to Twitter to complain about what Uber's move might mean for gentrification of Oakland and about the fear of Oakland changing in some of the not so great ways that San Francisco has changed as a result of the sharing economy. All this week, we've been talking about XCodeGhost, the malware infecting iOS apps. At first, it seemed that this was not a big issue, and all the malware stories we hear on a daily basis have definitely had a boy crying wolf effect on our interest in this one. Yesterday, we clarified that Apple had not said that only a small number of apps were infected with XCodeGhost. What they said was that there was only a small number that they knew of. According to researchers at FireEye, more than 4,000 apps are infected, and the effects of the malware might be a lot more dangerous than we previously assumed. We originally thought this was only a problem in the Chinese App Store, but now we're learning that some of these apps are used with devices like security cameras, for example, that are made by Chinese manufacturers but sold in the United States. I'm not saying that I only care if this is a U.S. problem, but what I do think is that this story is still developing, and there's a lot that we still don't know yet. Speaking of iOS, the first update for iOS 9 is available, and it fixes some problems users were having with Setup Assistant, alarms, timers, video stills, and more. iOS 9.0.1 is available now. Microsoft has issued an apology for the Skype outage on Monday. They said the glitch was due to a larger-than-usual configuration change, which some versions of Skype were unable to process correctly and caused forced disconnections from the network. Skype's free services were affected, but as they've reminded us several times, Skype for Business was not impacted. The outage lasted for about 15 hours. The New York Times is reporting that ebook sales have slipped in the U.S., while sales of paper books have stayed steady. The data comes from the Association of American Publishers. Now, early digital book predictions claimed 2015 was the year that ebooks would overtake print, but so far that has not happened. Now, if ebooks have replaced paper books in your life, we want to hear from you. I posted this earlier on our Facebook page, and Paul wrote, "I love to listen to books on Audible, but also I love to display books on my bookshelves for people to look at and look through at my house." You can comment on the story at our Facebook page at facebook.com/technewstonight. Coming up, I will talk to longtime tech writer Steven Levy, author of Hackers, Crypto, and In the Plex, How Google Thinks, Works, and Shapes Our Lives. We'll talk about the new Pebble Watch and his thoughts from the Oculus Connect conference. But first, this episode is brought to you by Braintree, code for easy online payments. If you're a mobile app developer, check out Braintree. Braintree is the payment solution used by companies that you know and love, like Uber, Airbnb, Hotel Tonight, Living Social, and Munchery. Braintree scaled with these companies from early-stage startups to the successful companies they are today, so Braintree can scale with your business too. With excellent customer service and simple integration, Braintree gets you ready to receive payments quickly. Braintree gives you a full-stack payment solution, support for all payment types your customers might want, so start accepting PayPal, Apple Pay, Bitcoin, Venmo, cards, and whatever is next, all with a single integration across all platforms with superior fraud protection, customer service, and fast payouts. To learn more and for your first $50,000 in transactions fee-free, go to BraintreePayments.com/TechNight. Pebble just announced a new smartwatch, and it's round. Now, I was one of those people who fell for the hype of the Pebble Time earlier this year, but by the time I got it, I had already fallen in love with my Apple Watch, So I was ready to ignore today's announcement until I saw Steven Levy's piece about Pebble on Medium. Now, Steven Levy, of course, is a longtime technology reporter, author of Hackers, former writer for Wired, now editor-in-chief of Back Channel on Medium. Welcome, Steven.
My pleasure.
So you recently talked to Pebble CEO Eric Mijikowski. Were you surprised by his outlook on the company?
Well, no, because he has been an optimist for a long time. Actually, we're doing a series on Eric and Pebble in Back Channel called Adventures of Pebble. I did one earlier, and I made it a point to visit the company the day after the Apple Watch announcement to see if he was crushed or morose, and he wasn't. And he's maintained, a very stiff upper lip through all this. And why not? Because, for a small company, they're actually doing pretty well.
So you call Pebble the Swatch of smartwatches. What do you mean by that?
Right. Well, the Pebble Time Round, which is a mouthful for a little watch, right, is, when I saw it, I went out there and he opened this box. It was sort of a Steve Jobs move where you talked to him and something was covered up and then he opened it up. That swatch is the first thing I thought. If you see these things, like they're round like a swatch and they're pretty thin. Probably not quite as thin as a swatch, but it's a binary thing. It just feels not like a heavy smartwatch with that taint of nerd to it, but more like a regular watch. And even though the encasement is stainless steel, it is, it's light. It's kind of fun. And you could see yourself wearing it and not having, like a style crisis, and has all the stuff that the Pebble Time has and gives you your notifications and your email alerts and baseball scores and all that other stuff, as well as telling time without going dark.
Now, he said something I found a little controversial, which you wrote about, which you say you've just reported. He said the new Pebble is the first smartwatch to look appropriate on a woman's wrist. So was he saying that my Apple Watch looks inappropriate on my wrist?
Well, I'm sure he'd like to say that, but I think he was really saying as it fits well. And when I interviewed him, I also was talking to his chief of staff, a female called Kristen Culp, and she was very happy because the watches that she's worn through the years have that thin band, and you really can't do a thin, in this case, 14 millimeter band with an Apple Watch. It's just not made for that. So a lot of women of the female persuasion like to have bands, very thin bands with their watches, and they feel it looks good on them. And through the years, that's been very popular. So I think he was just saying, we're the first one to give you that kind of thin band.
Right. So because the Pebble before that, the Pebble Time was, that was part of the problem that I had compared to the Apple Watch. I'm a sporty person, so it wasn't, I don't mind that, but definitely the Apple Watch looked better. So I guess that's what they're saying. It's thin. You said you described the new Pebble Round as being like the size of 4 quarters, whereas the Apple Watch is like the size of 6 quarters standing
right,
up.
Yeah, I actually looked that one up of how thick the quarter was. And I thought, 4 quarters is actually not like a stack. It's actually fairly thin. And the Apple Watch is exactly 6 quarters thick, if, their specs are right. And the specs I read on the web, where else, about how thick a quarter is correct. And that's 50%. So actually that's pretty big in technology terms. And some of the Apple Watches are, very heavy too. I looked at the weights. Kristen told me that at Pebble that she felt it was roughly 2 to 1 on the watches she measured against the Apple Watch. But I looked it up, and the heavier Apple Watches, the big gold ones and things like that, they're like about 3 times as much. And this is all including the band.
Well, you write about how Apple really has pushed the style aspect of this, especially like down to their last announcement of the Hermes bands that were, $1,200, and no one really blinked an eye. I think those are beautiful. Like that's definitely something. If I had $1,200 burning hole in my pocket, unfortunately I don't, so I won't be getting it. But yeah, so style is really the next thing, right?
I can see why you don't have $1,200 in your pocket. That's the first thing you'd buy from it. Yeah, you're right. It's utterly beautiful there, but I think it just shows where Apple is looking for, the kind of people they really want to use the Apple Watch. They have an Apple Sport version for $400, but their heart really seems to be in wooing the kind of market that would buy an Hermes, item and buy an expensive watch.
Well, the interesting thing about the Hermes too is they're really pushing the band because they know. I mean, the watch is going to be obsolete. It's not. It's not going to last. It's not something that you're going to hand. The watch itself is not something you're going to hand down to grandchildren.
Right, which is amazing to me that they've positioned as this luxury item there. And look, you're not even going to be able to make it work in future years. I will bet my life, really, that somewhere, maybe not my life, but I'll bet a lot that somewhere in the Apple Design Studio, they've got something working, which may be as thin as the Pebble Time Round. Apple makes stuff thinner down there, and and I'm sure that the next after that version of the Apple Watch is going to be a lot thinner, and they're going to do a lot of chest thumping about how great they are to make it thinner. And it'll be interesting to see how the people who sprang for the Apple Watch feel about that. My guess is it won't be a tragedy for them, because most people who bought the Apple Watch really just wanted the Apple Watch. They wanted to get in on it now. So I don't think they would be really shocked to think that in a year or 2 years, there'd be something that make their version 1 look bad. You look at the early iPods, you look at even the first version of the iPhone, it was much thicker and in retrospect looks clunkier.
Yeah, I mean, those of us who bought the Apple Watch right away, when the next Apple Watch comes out, we'll want that right away, so we won't be mourning that this one doesn't last.
Right. You can't say I was blindsided. This has never happened in the history of technology.
So speaking of the future, now you say that Pebble has a plan, and it involves following Apple and Android Wear to some extent, doing everything they do, but just a little bit cheaper. Can you explain a little bit about what you mean by that?
Yeah, Eric drew up two lines on a whiteboard. There were the two curves that were pretty similar, but he's saying these, Apple and the Android Wear, they're starting out with all the gadgets and sensors and whiz-bang stuff and the beautiful display, and they can't go down from there. They can't say, oh, here's a model now with an e-ink display, and here's our model without sensors, right? They're locked into the high end there, whereas he can easily go up to the high end. And I think there's a plan to give some of these sensors to the Pebble with their smart band program. We haven't seen the fruits of that yet, but the developers are supposedly working on stuff that will be able to look at your heart rate and things like that, and do other kinds of things as add-ons to the Pebble line.
So you're at the Oculus Connect conference, the VR conference. I know you don't have much time, but I do have one VR question for you, since you've been reporting on technology for so long. Now, I recently heard the state of VR described sort of like this: even though there's been decades of advancement, that was all just a warm-up, and we're only right now in the first inning. Does this feel like the real thing?
Well, it's interesting because I wrote a story in 1990, believe it or not, for Rolling Stone about virtual reality, and it was like the thing then, right? This time it's different. I think what's different is now the technology is enough that you can get a whole developer community in on it. That really didn't happen the first time around there. So I'm here in Hollywood for, of course, in the virtual reality conference, and there's hundreds of developers who are piling in here. I just was they had this, some programs at the Chinese theater nearby here, and some people slipped out of the Industrial Light and Magic show and were mesmerized because they ran across John Carmack, who just gave an impromptu Q&A for the developers, just giving them technical information. There's a hunger for it. So I think that there's more to it now, but it is early stuff. No one's talking about what's going to come out in the next 2 years is going to be anything but a prelude for what happens down the road. The only question is, and it really is the most open question of all, is how much is this going to be a major part of our lives in 10 years, in 20 years? Will we be spending hours every day in some sort of virtual reality, or at least have a persistent augmented reality device on there? And I think it's a reasonable argument, though I'm not 100% convinced, but I think it could happen.
Well, Steven Levy, thank you so much for joining us today. Steven Levy is the author of 7 books about technology. Like I said in an email earlier, I would have a million more questions I'd like to ask you about all of your books, so hopefully we can have you on again. Thank you so much for joining us.
I'll be happy to. Thanks, Megan.
Take care. If you want to learn more about the state of VR, tune into twit.tv/live tomorrow at 9:45 a.m. Pacific to watch the keynote from the Oculus Connect conference. And that is it for this edition of Tech News Tonight. You can subscribe to the show at twit.tv/TN2. You can write to us at tn2@twit.tv. And of course, watch live every weekday at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. And don't miss our morning news program, Tech News Today, every weekday at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. I'm Megan Maroney. Thanks for watching.
Bandwidth for Tech News Tonight is brought to you by CashFly.com.